this is Erica from SPARKLETTES ART, and today we're talking about art in the park. So, art in the park is something that's really common, especially in the homeschool world. Basically, you're doing an art class, usually for free, and you're doing it in a free space like a park, right? So public parks are a really great place to get started. And art in the park is kind of like a natural beginning spot for a lot of new art teachers or co-ops or classes, or for people, especially homeschoolers, because homeschoolers tend to want to be outdoors a lot, right? And we want to have these social opportunities, but we also kind of want to give direction. We want to have an output. We want to have like a reason to meet with our friends. And oftentimes dipping our toe into hosting a club or a class by hosting an art in the park class is one of the first ways that we try it. I know I certainly did. So there are definitely some things that you want to think about if you are going to be hosting an art in the park class. One of the first things that you need to consider is the weather. And yes, obviously you're going to be in tune to whether or not it's raining, right? That's going to really put a damper on your situation. But there are other concerns. I found something out fairly quickly. One of my very first art in the park classes, I looked outside my window and it was a beautiful sunny day, but we got to the park and it turned out it was also a very windy day. So that became a problem very, very quickly. Obviously, we're dealing with paper. So a special trick or tip that I have for you guys, if you are going to be hosting an art in the park class that might meet more than once, maybe one of the very first classes that you do is to have a rock painting class and have the kids either bring or find, preferably bring, because if you find them, they might need to be cleaned. But if you have rocks, maybe a couple of rocks per child that they can paint as their very first art project, they can bring those rocks back with them every week to serve as paperweights in case you have a windy day. Also, when it comes to weather, here's something else you want to consider. If you have a Facebook group that you're posting in and something comes up with the weather that's a little bit last minute, not everybody is necessarily going to get the message. So you might want to consider accumulating an actual phone chain, getting everybody's phone numbers so you can send out a text message. They do have things within Facebook groups now that are like group messaging. It's helpful, but I promise you people are going to miss the message. So if you have a particularly rainy day or a really windy day, you might wind up canceling last minute. And if you have to do that, it's a really good idea to have a connection or a way to contact everybody and let them know that you're not going to be there that day. Something else that you're going to want to consider for art in the park is your water source, okay? So if you're going to be doing watercolor painting or anything messy that you might need to clean your hands, and let's be honest, obviously potties for these children at some point, you're going to really need to know what is going on with your water source. So sometimes you luck out and there's like hoses nearby or things you can use. Sometimes you have bathrooms with a bunch of sinks, which is so wonderful. But sometimes you have like one bathroom with one dinky little sink that you have to push on the lever and it just trickles out water, and it's really not conducive to washing 150 hands or making water cups for 15 kids. So I have been known to actually carry a pitcher of water with me, a big giant pitcher that are a Gatorade container, depending on how much water I think I'm going to need for that lesson. But I'll bring that with me if the water source is not a great water source at the park. So that's something you really want to look into and know about beforehand. Along those lines, if you don't have a great water source at your park and you know that you don't have a great water source, but you do want to do a painting activity, you can bring with you either Ziploc bags or cellophane just to save a little bit of water so that that final rinse of your paintbrushes, they don't really need to worry about. So as you gather your dirty paintbrushes, you don't necessarily have to wash them at the park. Just bring something, remember to bring something to put them in as they're dirty so you can transport them home and wash them when you get home immediately. Don't slack on the washing, don't hurt your art supplies. Something else to consider when you're thinking about doing art in the park, especially if it's a homeschool situation, which it more than likely is, when you do something like art in the park, what it tends to be is a definite family affair, right? So the likelihood is you're going to have young children and they're going to have either older or younger siblings as well. So you want to be aware that there might be littles running around. And if they're too little to participate in the project that you're doing, you might want to consider having something for them to do, whether it's coloring pages, crayons, maybe your less expensive art supplies if you were doing something fancy that day and you don't want them to get into it. Sidewalk chalk, bringing a ball, something along those lines is a really good idea, because there are gonna definitely be times that you probably have littles or other family members running around that might need a little bit of distracting. Speaking of distracting, so here's something else that can be a wee bit of an issue when you're doing art in the park. So you're hosting an art class, and that's all well and good. And the art class is generally meant for like younger-ish children, elementary aged. If you are at a park and you have a choice on whether to host your art class at the picnic tables right next to the playground or the picnic tables that are a little bit further away, choose the tables that are a little bit further away. I know art is really, really fun, and most kids are really excited about it, but it's hard to compete with a playground, especially if there are other kids or younger siblings playing on that playground. So it can be really hard if you're right next to the playground to really get them to fully focus on you and your lesson, and not just trying to be running off and kind of creating some issues and chaos within your art in the park experience. Something that you definitely also want to check out beforehand is whether there's even tables and chairs there. Are there picnic tables? What kind of picnic tables are there? Sometimes you get lucky and you get these nice flat surfaces, but sometimes you have like really old splintered wood, or even worse, some of these new picnic tables are metal and they're like grates with all those little holes all over the place. Not the best for art, because you're coloring and that's showing up through the paper often. So you want to see what kind of surfaces you're dealing with so you can prepare accordingly. Do you need to bring tablecloths with you? I suggest yes, because you do want to respect your space. Do you need to bring maybe poster board types of table covers with you, just to cover up any surfaces that might be bumpy and lumpy that might affect their artwork and lead to some frustrations when it comes to doing your projects? Okay, so something else to definitely consider is, if you are doing art in a park, you're doing art outside, right? We're out in nature, and what we really want to do is be as respectful as possible. I really can't emphasize enough how I have seen people be really terrible about the way that they leave their spaces. And it's one thing when you do it in a classroom, but it's a whole other thing when you do it in a public park. So you want to make sure that yes, maybe you need table covers. You don't want to be painting on picnic tables and leaving marks all over. It's like graffiti at your park, right? You want to make sure you have table covers. You don't want to be dumping your yucky paint cups into a beautiful flower bed. You want to make sure that you go over some rules and kind of like assess your space and make sure that you are respectful of that space. You don't want to be doing a project that has little tiny snips of paper that are going to blow away in the wind, and then you're littering all over the park. If you are cutting, you want to have bags, or either little garbage bags or like a bucket, something accessible for the little scraps to go into before they start blowing away in the wind. You just want to be extra respectful of your environment, because your environment is also Mother Nature's environment, right? So we want to respect our public parks, right? Something else you might want to consider if you're doing art in the park, again, that hand washing, especially if you're using like messy materials, if you're doing some type of an oil or a chalk pastel. Bring some wipes with you. Having a couple of packs of baby wipes can go a really long way when it comes to art in the park, because sometimes, again, there's only that one sink. You can't be running back and forth. If you have chalk on your hands and it's smudging the paper, it's a really good idea to have baby wipes on hand, because they can serve all sorts of purposes, from washing hands to cleaning up messes. You're definitely going to want to have some things to clean up messes, because that certainly is going to happen in your art class. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk to you about is if you are hosting an art in the park class. Now, again, these are a great intro to teaching an art club or an art class type of thing. So a lot of times people who are doing these types of classes are kind of new at it, right? It's oftentimes homeschool moms, especially I know in our group, in our community with the Glitterbombers membership, a lot of people really dip their toe in with this, because our membership is so easy to use and makes it so easy to teach these lessons. So it's really applicable for a lot of situations, and we can bring art into almost everything we do. So it makes it really easy to bring art projects to your co-op or your playground meetups, and it makes us feel confident that we can teach them. So anyway, Something to think about if you're new at this, which most of us tend to be, you might want to check and make sure that your space is not occupied. I have definitely taught an art class or two on the ground. I have laid out my actual tablecloths on the ground as picnic blankets, basically, to teach art classes because I didn't check the calendar for the park and I didn't realize that the pavilion had been reserved for some type of event, whatever it was at the time. So if you are in a public place and you're not reserving it, you're not paying to reserve it, which is something to think about if you want to make sure you have the place if you want to pay for it. But if you're just going to a place for free, definitely check their calendar. If there's a website, oftentimes there's a bulletin board. Just make sure that that space is not occupied because otherwise you're going to wind up on the floor, under a tree, on the ground, which is totally doable, but not ideal. So that's it. Those are our tips and pointers about doing art in the park. And if you are someone who is either considering, thinking about, or maybe you already have started your own art class, follow along with this series on Sparklettes Art. We are talking all about things that you should know, think about, consider, prepare for, and just ways to get started with your art class, your art club, or Artsy Co-Op.